podcast's far too big to look at, kid. Your ears won't open wide enough, and you're constantly surrounded by the swirling stream of Columbia House Party. Jake, what's up, man?
That was silly. I like that.
Yeah, don't laugh in the middle of my intros. Come on, man.
I couldn't help it. We can take out my laugh. Whatever. We got editing.
No, we don't need to take out your laugh. It's we're off the rails. 30 seconds in. Record.
We're already some dead air. Sweet, sweet dead air.
I did too good a job with the intro is the problem.
You did.
By the way, I saw someone tweet, I think it was Ian Cohen at some point, that the first 2 minutes of the album we're discussing today are like the first 3 or 4 minutes of every podcast, where it's just the people just kind of rambling, getting their bearings about them, and then getting down to business.
I would say that is pretty accurate.
So that's us. We're just trying to set the tone of the album.
It was on purpose, is what everyone should take from it.
Yeah, not quite as literally scripted as the Say Anything intro, but in the same spirit.
Yeah, we're trying to set the tone and the feeling so people can go on this ride with us.
Oh boy, are there going to be some feelings. But Jake, fill us in. Where in the vast Conor Oberst discography or catalog are we going today?
So obviously, Conor Oberst / Bright Eyes have a lot of records we could have discussed. There are many places to go, all of sort of varying sounds. So I feel like any of the albums could be, and maybe will be one day, episodes of their own. But in deciding where to go, I thought I would go to the album that really sold me on the group. It wasn't the first Bright Eyes album I heard, but it was the first one where I was like, oh, okay, I can get into this. I find Bright Eyes to be an interesting one for me because, like a lot of people, I was very into them in high school, but I find myself to be much more into them and much more appreciative of them today than I was then. So I thought I went with the album that I think best represents what I find interesting about their work, and so maybe the most varied, if not the most interesting, or maybe the most interesting, depending on how you look at it. So that clumsy ass intro aside, today we are talking about Bright Eyes' 2002 album, Lifted.
Or The Story Is in the Soil, Keep Your Ear to the Ground.
The picture's far too big to look at, kid. Your eyes won't open wide enough, and you're constantly surrounded by the swirling stream of what is and what was. Well, we all made our predictions, but the truth still isn't out. But if you wanna see the future go, stare into a cloud.
All right, Jake. So you set up a little bit why you wanted to discuss Bright Eyes and why you wanted to discuss Lifted as an album in particular. We are in a bit of a groove right now with stuff from the early 2000s that holds up pretty well. And I think, Jake, you said, when you go back to Bright Eyes, it's something that resonates with you still, even though you were a big fan in high school. In 2017, at Consequence of Sound, Philip Kosaris kind of wrote about exactly that Bright Eyes might best encompass the idea that there's a difference between what you listened to in high school and what you grew up on, and that there's a difference in how those things hold up for you. I think for me, Bright Eyes is particularly relevant in that they came out kind of on the eve of file sharing, basically. Conor Oberst and Bright Eyes were like one of the first live journal era success stories.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way to put it, actually.
Yeah. I also think, too, an element of what helps Conor's songwriting hold up is that, in a recent episode, we talked about Dashboard Confessional and how his approach, at least in the genre, was novel in that he approached a lot of the emotions that come from relationships, attacking the emotion itself. And I feel like while Conor navigates that differently, there is a maturity in his approach to these things, even though he was only 22 at the time of this album, that makes it hold up a little better than some of the other stuff in the genre around the early 2000s.
Yeah, and I think we'll get into this in a little bit, but your point about him being 22, I think, is relevant because that was kind of his whole story at first. Like, he was just like the young prodigy, and then everyone just kind of, I think with this album especially, everyone had to sort of start taking him seriously as a musician, as an artist, and not just like the young songwriter guy.
Yeah, for sure. It's the fact that his first kind of breakthrough was at 18 with Letting Off the Happiness, like that's yeah, it's a good point. This kind of like, he was on the radar, but this was like, oh no, he's on the radar in like a serious and potentially commercially successful way. The other thing I find really interesting about Bright Eyes, and we'll probably talk on it with some of the songs specifically, is not necessarily my attachment to him in the music, but when you zoom out, I feel like Oberst kind of bridges, and I know that Bright Eyes gets included with the kind of emo boom of the early 2000s a lot, but I think he has so much folk sensibility that you can draw a line through a lot of 60s and 70s folk revival stuff through Conor and to a lot of the, like, maybe not emo, but some of the emo stuff that uses those folk elements now. Like, I think you can trace a line, if you're careful, through, Neil Young and John Prine, through Conor Oberst or the Weaker Thans, and get to bands like The Hotelier and Big Thief. And like, those aren't direct because we're talking 20, 30-year gaps in between each one. But I feel like he does have a hand in kind of threading kind of the peak of the folk revival before our time, and the way that folk is included in a lot of like the emo subgenres now.
Yeah, and I think that because he sort of started from a more quote unquote emo perspective, and because he was associated with all the Saddle Creek bands, I feel like less so now, because I think he does, but I find it interesting that he wasn't sort of included, especially with like I'm Wide Awake, It's Morning and Casadega, how he wasn't really associated with sort of that rise in the alt country world as sort of like the Wilcos and the My Morning Jackets was, even though he's in Monsters of Folk with Jim James from My Morning Jacket and M. Ward, who are both very much in the sort of alt country, Southern rock, folk revival world. And I feel like it took Conor a while to sort of be accepted as that, even though he kind of has always been that, just also with a million other ideas that take him in different directions. Yeah,
for sure. And it's, and that extends beyond this too, to where you get to the way he works with artists now. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I guess, the other thing I wanted to ask you specifically was why Lifted? And I know we normally do the album ranking stuff at the end of the podcast, and I know you have some hot takes when it comes to Bright Eyes album rankings, at least relative to some other rankings that have been put out there. But in Conor's estimation, he seems, I think he thinks this is the best Bright Eyes album, because he tweeted out a link to an Uproxx ranking of their albums that had Lifted at number 1. So I don't know if that's Conor just spreading that piece, or if that's an endorsement of Lifted as the top one. But what's your take there?
Yeah, I think that what I would say is that I think Lifted is the best one, even though it's not my favorite one. But I think that it's the closest to the fully realized whole of all of Bright Eyes' many, many parts, is what I would say.
Yeah, that's fair. So I think that's probably a good point to take a very quick break, and we're going to talk about Lifted, or The Stories in the Soil. Keep your ear to the ground after this.
So we discussed a lot of the early days of Conor Oberst in our episode on Desaparecidos which you should go listen to if you want to hear that part of it, because I'm not going to do it again. But to very quickly recap, he was in a band called Commander Venus in the mid-90s. They ended in 97 and 98, which is around the time that he began his career as Bright Eyes. In 1998, he released a collection of songs recorded 1995 to 1997, which were 20 songs he'd been writing throughout the Commander Venus days. It is an extremely varied album. There's features
convoluted was what I was going to say, but your choice is a little better.
A lot of drum machines, keyboards, very odd vocals. It was not particularly well received. He would follow that up later in 1998 in November with Letting Off the Happiness, which I think you could probably call the first real Bright Eyes record. It was only 10 tracks and much more focused. That album featured Matt McGinn of Cursive on bass, and also featured Kevin Barnes of Montreal and Jeremy Barnes of Neutral Milk Hotel and Beirut, which would sort of speak to a lot of Bright Eyes collaborative properties as they would go forward. Letting Off the Happiness was reasonably well received. It got a 6.8 from Pitchfork. It was mostly recorded in Oberst's family basement on an 8-track recorder. He followed that up with the Everyday and Every Night EP in 1999, and in May 2000 released, I guess, what you would call the breakthrough Bright Eyes record, Fevers and Mirrors, in typical Pitchfork fashion. On release, it was given a 5.4, but it has since been re-reviewed and changed to a 9.0, and was also named the 170th best album of the 2000s by said Pitchfork. The main musicians were, as usual, Conor Oberst and Mike Mogis. We will talk a lot more about Mike Mogis in a bit, but it also included Tim Kasher of Cursive and Joe Knapp of Sun Ambulance. In 2012, Ian Cohen said, "Fevers and Mirrors isn't degraded from being removed from the bullshit of your youth, and in any context, it's a tremendous record that is critic-proof in the same way Violent Femmes, Pinkerton, and yes, the Smiths are. Scoff if you must, but let me ask you this. How many people do you know that got into Morrissey as teens? Okay, now how many got started in their 30s? Up to this point, Oberst had released some decent material, culminating in Letting Off the Happiness, his On Avery Island to Fevers, In the Airplane Over the Sea. But beyond that, his work as Commander Venus and solo was mostly notable for the youth of the person who made it. It was all very precocious, and little of it stands up now, which is part of why I would argue, this is me, Jake, saying this, not Ian Cohen saying this, that Fevers and Mirrors is sort of the breakthrough and the beginning of Bright Eyes as we think of them today. I wouldn't say that entire record holds up. I know it's lower on my rankings, I would say, than I think on others, but there is definitely a lot of what was to come on there, and definitely a lot of Oberst's songwriting talent on display there.
I think that what stands out for me, like when I go back and listen to Bright Eyes, is like, that's the emo album, right? Like that's the, even though he had more commercial success with Wide Awake eventually, Fever and Mirrors is, I think, what gets him locked into the emo discussion. Whereas, the album we're talking about today gets a little folkier, and then, Wide Awake is almost like indie pop. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but I feel like the emo, like if we're splitting hairs on genres, Fevers and Mirrors is kind of where he got rooted into that conversation.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is because of songs like this one, The Calendar Hung Itself.
Does he kiss your eyelids in the morning when you start to raise your head? And does he sing to you incessantly from the space between your bed and wall? Does he walk around all day at school with his feet inside your shoes, looking down every few steps to pretend he walks with you? Or does he know that place below your neck is your favorite to be touched? And does he cry through broken sentences like I love you far too much? Does he lay awake listening to your breath, worried you smoke too many cigarettes? Is he coughing now on a bathroom floor for every speck of tile? There's 1,000 more you won't ever see, but must hold inside yourself eternally.
like the specificity in the song title, as if you came across a calendar hanging, you might suspect someone did it to the calendar. Anyway, Conor has a big, it's not quite Fall Out Boy or Dashboard, but the song title names throughout, especially on Lifted, is
truly,
a lot.
Yeah. I remember finding that when I was in high school and first listening to them. I don't want to say off-putting because that's the wrong term, but it was definitely one of those things of like, ooh, what does this mean? It's an odd name for a song.
Yeah, why is it a whole sentence? Or in one case on Lifted, why is it an entire conversation in the song title?
Yeah, exactly. But I do agree with you that sort of the emo Bright Eyes, and like really what's kind of, I don't know if ironic's the right word, odd about, in my opinion, Bright Eyes being put in the emo world is that I would argue that Fevers and Mirrors is kind of the only one of all of his albums that I would consider like emo.
Yeah, I mean, we've discussed before how we don't care that much, like as much as some people do to cut those lines.
Giant quotation marks around emo.
But yeah, I would think I think the bulk of the Bright Eyes catalog falls more into like folk and lo-fi than what's classically emo or even like that Midwest emo as things get grouped now. But yeah, that's the one album I think. And I think you kind of do see a transition across his three biggest albums from kind of what the styling is on Fevers and Mirrors to then Lifted to then Wide Awake. Like I think you can kind of chart that as well.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that.
By the way, this is where people can picture me in Excel trying to graph emo versus folk versus lo-fi across three albums, like a time series graph of what the music sounds like.
Pick the genre. Yeah. I like it. No, it makes it easy for me to not have to have these arguments on the air when I just like, Blake will figure it out. So after a brief break from Bright Eyes to release the first Desaparecidos record in February 2002, Bright Eyes.
Which, as a reminder from an earlier episode, rules. Desaparecidos were an awesome side project.
They were. I miss them. I hope they come back. Even though, like, I feel greedy. Bright Eyes are finally coming back. I'm like, no, bring back the other one.
Also, I think one thing that we neglected I know we touched on Desaparecidos, like 2015 Desaparecidos, just a little bit. Did we talk about Te Amo, Camila Vallejo?
I think I played it because it's my favorite song on the album, but I don't know how deep we went into it.
Yes, a love song for a Chilean Communist Party politician is just chef's kiss.
Yes, indeed.
For Desaparecidos.
Yes, so they released the first Desaparecidos record, Read Music, Speak Spanish, in February of 2002. Bright Eyes then released Lifted, or The Story is in the Soil, Keep Your Ear to the Ground, on August 13th, 2002. Oberst was 22 when the album was released, which covered a lot of the press coverage around him and the band, as Ian Cohen pointed out before. Lifted, in my opinion, represents, as we were sort of saying, a bit of a style shift for Oberst and the group in general. It's way more expansive. I wouldn't call it experimental, especially not as experimental as he would get later in his career, but I definitely think it's the biggest, in quotes, Bright Eyes record. It's definitely a far cry from the lo-fi sound of his previous work. This is an album that features strings, horns, mandolins, glockenspiels. Most of the songs don't even have choruses. As we'll get into, a song later in the record opens with Oberst saying, "Give me some goddamn timpani." So that's sort of the sounds he was going for.
You know, Bright Eyes kept that Glock on them.
Of course.
That glockenspiel.
You need the glockenspiel. Them and Los Campesinos repping for glockenspiels.
There you go.
There are a ton of musicians that played on this album. Of course,
too many. Please don't list them all. It would be a very me thing to list them all, but please don't.
I won't list them all, but I will list some. Other than Oberst and Mogus, we have Matt Vogt, Clint Schnace from Cursive, Mike Sweeney also played drums, Todd Bacali from The Faint, Blake Sennett and Jenny Lewis provide backup vocals, of course from Rilo Kiley, Greta Cohn of Cursive and many other projects played cello, Matt McGinn of Cursive once again played bass, Ted Stevens also of Cursive plays guitar, Arenda Fink of Azure Ray plays trumpet and sang backup vocals, along with many others. All told, there are 25 different musicians credited on this album, including Katie Muth who played oboe. And the only reason I'm pointing that out is because Katie Muth is now a member of Pennsylvania State Senate, and I think that's cool.
That is cool. Also, almost every one of those people being involved with Saddle Creek Records in some way.
Yes.
It's just this album is just like a Saddle Creek's record album. It's not even necessarily a Bright Eyes one.
Pretty
You've got
much,
Rilo Kiley
yeah.
in there, a lot of cursive. Yeah, it's good stuff.
It is. Oberst told Omaha Weekly in 2002 that it was the most enormous production I've ever worked on as far as arrangement and scope. I demoed the record twice. I recorded the songs once in Athens and then did a demo here, and each time fleshed out the songs a little more and kind of came out with the parts I thought would be good. Both Andy and Mike took my ideas and ran with them.
There's no beginning to this story. A bookshelf sinks into the sand, and a language learned, the forgotten turn, is studied once again. It's a shocking bit of footage viewed from a shitty TV screen. You can squint at it through snowy static to make out the meaning, and keep on stretching the antenna, hoping that it will come clear. We need some reception, a higher message. Just tell us what to fear, 'cause I don't know what tomorrow brings. It's alive with such possibility, but I won't be frightened when I'm awoken from this dream and return to that which gave birth to me. Give birth to me, give birth to me, give birth to me. And the story goes, and the story goes, and it goes on and on and on and on. It's going on and on and on and on. It's going on and on and on and on. It's going on and on and on and on. It's going on and on and on and on. It's going on and on and on and on. It's going on and on and on and on and on.
He also took this expansiveness on the road. He told Lazy Eye in 2002, "We're taking a 14-piece band, but there will be 20 of us total," he said with a look of concern on his face. "Something like 13 will be in a bus and the rest will ride in my van. This tour is by far an anomaly," which I can see like the necessity of that many musicians because of how these songs sound, but like, goddamn. It's a lot of musicians.
That's also, it's just like not efficient for a tour. Like, how are you going to make enough money?
Right.
Especially at this stage. Like Bright Eyes now, yeah, you could probably get away with that, but
yeah, this was the big break with 25 people. The other thing that's, I think, interesting about the record is for someone who started his career notably writing very personal point of view songs, Oberst said that these songs are mostly represented by archetypes, though obviously with some personal experience in. He said, "I just started writing songs and they weren't like the old ones. It's nothing I thought about ahead of time. It just ended up not being so dark. I still think there's some sad moments on the record. I try to use whatever tools possible to convey whatever you want to call the truth of the song. I'm willing to draw from my own life or craft something to achieve something that's real at the end of the song, but that's just what writing is. Anyone who gets hung up on if a song applies to my life or something I created has missed the point." And
yeah, sorry to jump in there. Like, I don't, I certainly see the, if not happier, the like less morose songwriting here, but I don't think, when he says that he still has some sad songs, I don't even know if there are obviously sad points, but what I found lyrically in this album, and even if it's through archetypes, is like, especially for a 22-year-old and especially in this genre at this time, it's a lot more like self-challenging kind of about like, we talked in Dashboard about how it's more confronting the actual emotions himself. Well, here I feel like there's a lot of like him challenging how to be unselfish with those emotions and how to be unselfish with your actions. And I don't, that theme doesn't come up in every song, but that's, it's almost like not learning to love, but like learning how to be a person who is not selfish in, or doesn't let their emotions make them selfish as you go through some of these things. And again, for a 22-year-old to have that level of, even if it's not, it's imperfect, but there's a level of maturity there. And I think that's, again, part of what helps it hold up a little bit.
Yeah. And I think it's also sort of interesting in the context of where his writing would go as he went on in his career, where you have, I'm Wide Awake is very much just like a collection of folk songs, not necessarily from any perspective or any personal perspective. I would argue that Digital Ash weirdly has his most personal writing, even though it's his least personal sounding record because it's all keyboards. Then Casadega is very much an old school like folk record and collection of songs. People's Key is a lot about spiritualism and things like Haile Selassie. So I think it's his idea that like figuring out what is personal to him and what isn't misses the point of his music is sort of where he would take a lot of his work further in his career. For sure.
And we're gonna get into some of the songs and some of the examples of this after this. So, sorry, we just played a clip a little earlier we forgot to introduce. That was the song Method Acting, which is the second song on the album. The one we played off the top is the opener, called Big Picture, which, if you're wondering why Jake actually wanted to do this album, it's because there's a 9-minute opener that's only partially a song and seems just like a stream of consciousness session of Conor on his guitar. I feel like that's the real reason Jake wanted to do this.
And it's not even the best long song on the album. Hey, because there's more.
In your bag, as they say, Jake.
Speaking of long songs and complicated arrangements, I think now is a good time for us to take a quick little break from talking directly about Conor Oberst and talk about Mike Mogis, who I don't think gets the credit he deserves for the career that he's had. I think when we were talking in our Death Cab for Cutie episode about the amazing and varied and impressive work that Chris Walla has done in his career, I think it's fair to say that Mike Mogis comes from a similar vein. And if Chris Walla was sort of master producer guy for Barsuk, Mike Mogis was absolutely master producer guy for Saddle Creek. Some bands that Mike Mogis has produced include Cursive, Rilo Kiley, The Elected, The Faint, Jenny Lewis and the Watson Twins, M. Ward, Monsters of Folk, Julian Casablancas, She and Him, Man Man, and Rustin Kelly.
Oh yeah.
That's
great.
Oh,
you get Zoe Deschanel in there. You get Rustin, you get that Dirt Emo from Rustin Kelly. I don't know if that's the one he produced, but
he didn't produce the Dirt Emo EP. But he has Julian Casablancas in there, that really weird Madman record. Yeah, he's great. Oberst told Lazy Eye in 2002 that he considers Mike Mogis to be his only real collaborator. And I think that it's fair to say that even though Bright Eyes is often held up as a Conor Oberst project, Mike Mogis is as much a part of the group as anyone and is still one of only 3 credited members of the band in 2020. So Mike Mogis is clearly a big part of this. Oberst said in 2002 that Letting Off the Happiness is the first thing Mike recorded without his brother AJ. We've sort of grown up together. He's become a really amazing producer in my mind. Our relationship is built on the fact that we learned how to play together and everything is fair game. I can give my opinions about what microphone we should use and where it should be in the room, and he'll comment about a lyric. He's just one of my best friends and the only guy I consider a genius. He would tell The New Yorker in 2005, the Lifted album in 2002 was me and the producer Mike Mogis and this other friend of ours, Andy Lemaster. When I'm arranging stuff with Mike, since we don't write out music, I write a lot of parts on keyboard. Then we show the cello part to the cello player and half of it makes sense and half of it doesn't. And he'll say, you can't really play that, which I think is a interesting way to write these expansive songs. Oberst wanted to say that Mike is very technical. He deals with every kind of instrument or musical thing, which is kind of strange, but at the same time, he's not a tech guy. I can describe things to him in the most non-musical terms, like, I want this to sound like ice cracking, or I want this to sparkle, and he'll know.
All right.
And I think the reason that Mike Mogis is so impressive as it relates to this album is, as we said before, there are 25 credited musicians on this thing, and Mogis was tasked with a lot of the arrangements. And I think these arrangements can sort of best be seen on this record as a song I alluded to earlier about starting with some goddamn timpani. The final track on the record, Let's Not Shit Ourselves to Love and Be Loved.
Here we go.
Could I get a goddamn timpani roll to start this goddamn song? Tonight, here's a goddamn song. For all you goddamn people. Animals laugh from the dark of the wilderness. A baby cries hard in an apartment complex. As I pass in a car buried under the influence, the city's driving me out of my mind. I've seen a child, he's caught in the sad trap of gravity. He falls from the lowest branch of the apple tree and lands in the grass and weeps for his dignity. This time he will not aim so high. Let's just hope that is enough.
That song's also cool because, I mean, obviously it's big musically, but there's the part once Conor really gets going, like that's the closest thing to a Despacito song on this album too, where like he lets the vocals go a little punk.
I find he does that a lot on these more restrained Bright Eyes records. Like you hear it at the end of also the closing track on I'm Wide Awake with Road to Joy, where he sort of lets the let's fuck it up boys make some noise part, or he sort of lets that out of him. So I wonder if it's a closing track thing for him.
Yeah, maybe. Just let that thing sing. Let the Glock sing, as it were, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
The way that phrase is always used and intended.
So Lifted, believe it or not, did have a single. And it's probably the most, up to this point, the most successful Bright Eyes song. And I don't like it. The song I'm talking about, of course, is Lover I Don't Have to Love. I would say
now, did you like this song better when it was redone by Brand New as Sick Transit Gloria, Glory Babes, or when it was redone by Panic at the Disco with a little more pomp after that?
Yes, kind of. I liked this song in high school, but I feel like it doesn't really click for me anymore. It's probably one of my least favorite Bright Eyes songs, if I'm being honest, even though it's arguably one of his bigger hits. They even made a music video for it, which is a karaoke video. It was very notably covered by Betty Seviert, whose version was played extensively in the season 3 episode of the OC, The Undertow, because of course it does. This song quotes Catcher in the Rye, which I asked your name, you asked the time. A thing that I want to talk about or talk around this song, I suppose, with you, can't speak today. I always find interesting when like one of a band's big hits of a band that I really, really love is not one of my favorite songs. Do you have any songs of bands that are sort of like notable songs, but aren't songs you like from bands you'd consider in your top bands?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Other than like, you know, like the later Fall Out Boys, I'm not counting. I'm just talking about like from albums that you enjoy.
I mean, Fall Out Boy is an interesting example because, like, Dance Dance is not one of my favorite tracks, and it was, like, one of the ones responsible for them breaking through because of its Madden soundtrack inclusion and stuff like that. So, Fall Out Boy is not a poor example. I'm trying to think. Like, I'm sure there are a lot of ones, like, in the pop punk, like, early 2000s, mid-2000s pop punk where, you know, the song that got a band popular wasn't, you know, you get that layer of, you know, Jake-ness where it's like, well, that's not actually what they sound like, or that's not what I like about them. I'm drawing a blank right this second, but there are definitely examples of that. Do you have any other ones that come to mind?
I mean, I do, but they're all from albums that I'm like, it's in that vein of like albums I don't really like later Green Day stuff I think is on there, or like even like a bunch of stuff on like Blink-182's California, which is an album I like, but like has some real clunkers on there. But that's why kind of my point about this one that I find so interesting, that it's on like what would be considered one of the classic Bright Eyes records. And I just like don't like this song. I remember I saw Bright Eyes the one and only time I saw them in 2005 at the Docks, when it was still the Docks, on the Digital Ash tour, and they played this in the encore, and everyone went fucking crazy. And that was one of those like, oh, this is a big song kind of moment. It definitely has some 2000s emo-y lyrics, I would say, but I don't know if that really, as we already talked about, doesn't really suit Bright Eyes. There's a weird question in that Lazy Eye interview I've quoted a couple times that I think is very much of the times and the way emo was discussed. That's kind of a reductive question about girls at his shows who sing along to the song with tears in their eyes. Oberst simply said, "I don't know what to say about that. I'm glad they made a connection with the music and want to feel empathy, but at the same time," and then it trails off. So I feel like he didn't really know what to make of this either. To get a sense of what we're talking about, this is Lover, I Don't Have to Love.
I like that song more than you do. I do wonder though how much of it is just like it reminds me of so many other songs that were released in like the 5 years that followed this.
Yeah,
it's like, oh yeah, that's the formula. Let's all whisper sing. Like, you know, you can draw a line from Conor Oberst to Yin Yang Twins in terms of like, let's whisper the first part of this song. deep cut there.
You could. Sorry. But I do think your point about it being like almost literally Sic Transit Gloria is not wrong. Like, it also kind of sounds like Cursive songs from the Domestica era, which is around this time. And I think it is just very much of its time, but I don't like it as much as other songs from that time, I guess.
Yeah, and I think too, like, what's weird, I guess, is that like it became one of Bright Eyes' bigger songs, and like Bright Eyes is obviously known for, you know, like we've said, kind of some of the sadder leaning or at least the like really well written songs, and I don't know that that's like a great example of it. Like the Big Picture couldn't be a single because of the length and scope, but it's got things like It's Cool If You Keep Quiet, But I Like Singing, and, you know, I Think I'll Be Returning Now to That Town Where I Was Born. And you have more on like when we get to You Will, You Will, You Will, there's the lyric, You Are the Reoccurring Kind, You Never Really Leave My Mind. And there's not for a song like this one to kind of cut through and be well regarded and be like borrowed from by other acts, I don't think it's one of the better like Conor songwriting songs on the album.
Yeah, and I think especially when you compare it to sort of where he would go as he grew older, like you think of I think of a song like "I Must Belong Somewhere" off Casadega, which I think is maybe his best written song. Like I think that song is brilliant, and then this is just kind of like, okay, he wrote a emo pop song, which there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just kind of not what I look to him for.
The best written Bright Eyes song was their cover of Devil Town, which was written by Daniel Johnston. That's the best written Bright Eyes song. Also, this album's a good indication of this, but you get it all over Bright Eyes, like a big Daniel Johnston influence.
Oh yeah,
on Conor as well.
Perhaps not coincidentally, with Lover I Don't Have to Love being a single and being sort of well known and well received, at least compared to the rest of his work at this point, Oberst seemed very prepared for what he saw as an eventual breakthrough to the mainstream with Lifted. He was featured in Rolling Stone, not in the article that we have talked about a couple times that called him the next Bob Dylan. That was on the press tour for I'm Wide Awake It's Morning. But he was featured in Rolling Stone for this record, which was well reviewed by Rolling Stone. He told Lazy Eye in regards to being featured in Rolling Stone, "It's cool, but for as many people who say that it's great, there are more who will say that it sucks. There will be a backlash from the indie population about any mainstream success. I don't worry about the indie population. Anyone who's going to stop liking your band because of the fact that others like you or because you're covered in the press or MTV are probably not into music for the right reason. It's probably better to shed those supporters anyway. You feel like an asshole for forgetting people over time. For the most part, everyone understands. It was way easier in the past. You could roll into a town and play for 100 kids and ask for a place to stay and get taken to someone's house and party. Now it's not like that. There's more of a barrier between us and the audience. I want to make relationships with people, but I don't even have time to be good friends with my actual friends. I've learned to read people pretty quickly and escape if it's going to be a real awkward situation." Which sounds like a guy who knew exactly what his career was going to be.
Yeah, and I think, there's you can hear too on this album like where he was going to go. Like I mentioned earlier, I think you can trace through Fevers and Mirrors through Lifted to where he went on Wide Awake, which was his most commercially successful one. And I think you can hear where it's going to go on this album. I mentioned You Will earlier, and I think that's probably the one of the better examples of it.
Yeah, I think when I said off the top that this is sort of the cumulative whole of the Bright Eyes experiment, or however I phrased that 35 minutes ago, I think that this whole album is sort of a blueprint for the Bright Eyes discography. Like you have Make War, which is very much a country detour that's both political, as is Let's Not Shit Ourselves, which would speak to a lot of his later political writing, especially in sort of the, not Rock Against Bush. I forget what his Against Bush thing was called, but where he'd go there, and also the sort of countryer, folkier sounds on Casadega. I agree with you. I think You Will. That to me sounds the most on this album like I'm Wide Awake It's Morning, which I would assume is probably the most well-known Bright Eyes record. I was originally going to put Make War as the song discussed here, but I think You Will is more appropriate just because it leads into his major breakthrough.
Well, you say that I treat you like a book on a shelf. I don't take you out that often, 'cause I know that I've completed you, and that's why you are here. That's the reason you stay here. How awful that must feel. Now I write when I'm away, letters that you'll never read. You said go explore those other women, the geography of their bodies, but there's just one map you'll need. You're a boomerang, you'll see. You will return to me.
around, then my plans will all be ruined. If you don't, I'll start drinking like the way I drank before. Oh, and I just won't have a future anymore.
The direction that Bright Eyes would take, at least with I'm Wide Awake, It's Morning, seems to have been on purpose. In the press tour for that album in 2005, Oberst told The New Yorker that the acoustic direction was in response to the grandiosity of Lifted. He said, I mean, I'm really glad we did Lifted, but it became this grandiose project and there wasn't a lot of space in it. It was layer upon layer of instruments built up. I wanted a Beach Boys' Pet Sounds or a Leonard Cohen's Death of a Ladies' Man feel, an immense orchestral wave. But when that was over, I thought, there's no space in this music. It's too much. My immediate reaction to that was to want to do a record that was just guitar and my voice with everything stripped down, taking what we're doing live a lot and going for more of one of those 70s folk records that I like a lot. You know, Neil Young or Jackson Browne or Joni Mitchell, which I do think, to Oberst's credit, is exactly what I'm Wide Awake It's Morning sounds like, to the point that I have a very clear memory of playing that record in the car and my dad stopping it and saying, why are you listening to folk music? This sounds like what I used to listen to. So he clearly succeeded.
Yeah, there you go. And yeah, you can hear it on this album. You can hear, especially on the next one, like we said, this kind of transition from, getting lumped in with emo to being kind of the connecting piece, or one of the connecting pieces from 60s, 70s folk to, or I guess even 80s folk to current folk that has, those emo elements in it. So, you get a little Kevin Devine sound, Sharon Van Etten, that kind of stuff. You can trace through some of the Bright Eyes stuff. So Jake, did people, before we get to Wide Awake, where he would go, did people enjoy Lifted?
Oh, yes. When it was released, it received a 7.7 from Pitchfork, a 4.5 out of 5 from AllMusic, 8 out of 10 from Spin, a B+ in The Village Voice. Rolling Stone named it the 4th best album of 2002. Blender named it the 52nd greatest indie rock album of all time. It was the first Bright Eyes record to hit the Billboard 100. It spent 1 week at 161. And as of 2009, it has sold 340,000 copies in the United States. In 2003, the band made their network television debut on Letterman, which they did not play a song from Lifted. Oberst told Stereogum in 2020, it was weird because Lifted had been out for a while, and as those things go, the record came out and it took a while for people to catch on. So by the time we got the Letterman offer, I don't know, it was like a year and a half after the record had come out, and we should have just played a song off the record. That would have been the normal smart thing to do from like a commercial point, I guess. But I had a bunch of new songs. I was like, let's play a new song. Everyone thought that was weird, like the publicist and Letterman, but they were like, fine, do what you want. So we played this song, Trees Get Wheeled Away. I was very nervous. I've gotten used to it now, those TV shows, but the first time you do it, it's like such a different experience than a regular show. Just cameras coming, flying all around you, in your face, and it doesn't ever sound really that great. It just kind of feels sterile and strange, but I think we did a pretty good job for our first time. As we said, in 2005, Bright Eyes would release I'm Wide Awake It's Morning and Digital Ash and a Digital Urn on the same day as sort of companion albums that sound nothing alike. In 2007, they would release Casadega, and in 2011, they would release The People's Key. Bright Eyes now consists of Conor Oberst, Mike Mogus, and Nate Walcott. Nate Walcott has played in Conor Oberst's Mystic Valley Band. M. Ward's band, has also been a keyboard player for the Red Hot Chili Peppers and has played in the studio with U2. And on August 21st of 2020, releasing their first album since 2011 with Down in the Weeds, Where the World Once Was. And the first song we got from it was this song, Persona Non Grata.
Getting dressed for a date, put on blue aftershave, wore a kilt like a Celt, hid the way that I felt, combat boots, fallen leaves, West Village, Halloween, to a Bollywood song, taking shots till we're gone, unwelcome in the autumn, persona non grata, I'm the last of the best, I'm your thoughts in the swamp. There's a playground of children in the shadows of buildings. There's a line out the church where your homelessness works, where the stained glass of crimson meets Ezekiel's visions. Saw a valley of bones where no man shall be saved. And now you come to me asking that. And now you come to me and you're asking that. Oh, how can we reconcile?
It's good. Jake, are we at the point now where you get to unleash your album ranking or your album take?
Yeah, I think I will. So again, I am not arguing this as harshly as I do some of my other music takes, because I understand that this is not the quote unquote correct take, but it's my take.
Oh, so unlike all your other takes that people disagree with, where you're right, you admit that this time when they disagree with you, they're right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Glad we established that.
Unlike my Sufjan Stevens takes, which we'll get to another day, in which I am 100% correct.
Save it for the Christmas bonus episode.
Yeah. My favorite Bright Eyes record is actually Digital Ash and a Digital Urn. I can't really explain why. I just like it the most, and I like when he allows himself to fall into sort of those darker keyboardy places. Maybe it could also be because that's the show I saw him tour when I was in high school, so it left a mark on me, which wouldn't surprise me. So I have Digital Ash number 1. I have Lifted, as we're discussing today, at number 2. As I said, I think it's the best one. It's just not my favorite. And then I think the one that people will have the most objection to is that my number 3 Bright Eyes record is The People's Key from 2011, which I know was not the most popular record, but I love it. And I think it's great.
Yeah, I do not have 2 of your top 3.
No, I wouldn't imagine so.
In my top 3, I think I have a more standard ranking. I have it Lifted, Wide Awake, and Fevers and Mirrors. And I don't feel strongly between 2 and 3 there, which I realize is strange because Lifted is kind of like the middle ground between those. Mm-hmm. But I like the emo side and I like the folkier side. I like their Daniel Johnston cover Devil Town from Friday Night Lights. It's one of the best things they've done, I think. And then, on I'm Wide Awake It's Morning, you get First Day of My Life, which I think is one of, if not one of the best Bright Eyes songs, one of the best jobs Conor has done as a songwriter. So yeah, I think I'd have I'm Wide Awake It's Morning a little ahead of Fevers and Mirrors, but Fevers and Mirrors being like the first Bright Eyes that I was introduced to also has an impact there. So I can't really split those two that much, but Lifted is my favorite Bright Eyes album, or The Stories in the Soil, Keep Your Ear to the Ground.
I will also say neither of us put it on our rankings, but I want to give Casadega some love because it's not my favorite by any means, but it has some of my favorite Bright Eyes songs. So I just wanted to give Casadega some love.
Yeah, there you go. There's just 6 Bright Eyes albums that we're going to try to shoehorn into a top 3 here.
Basically.
Yeah. All right. We now have to talk songs, Jake. We have to pick one for the mixtape. I think I kind of tipped my hand about what my favorite 1 or 2 from this album are, but to give you a top 3, I would probably go Let's Not Shit Ourselves, You Will, You Will, You Will, and Bowl of Oranges in some order.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have Method Acting, Let's Not Shit Ourselves, and Make War as in some order.
So do we get as simple as Let's Not Shit Ourselves is the only one on both of our top 3s, or do we feel like something else better represents the discussion here?
No, I'm happy to go with Let's Not Shit Ourselves, not just because it's on both of ours, but because I do think it represents the album well with the songwriting, the mass musicianship, Mogus's arrangements, and also it's been a while since we put like a 9-minute track on the mixtape, so...
Yeah, we got to Goldsbie it up at some point, right?
Right?
This is good, though. I think, like you said, the mixtape needs a little something different. I like where this song goes, and I don't know that I'd ever put a 9-minute song on a real mixtape I was making, but we'll do it here.
Yeah, I think I agree with that.
All right, so we have our song from the mixtape. It's Let's Not Shit Ourselves.